Imagine this. It's 1939 in Nazi Germany, and every single loaf of bread leaving a convent is being searched by soldiers with rifles because they know someone is smuggling children right under their noses, and they just can't figure out how, and that someone is a nun who pushes a wooden cart every morning with bread baskets, stacked so high they look completely innocent, and inside those baskets, hidden under the bread, are Jewish children holding their breath so the soldiers don't hear them. And she did this not once, not twice, but 300 times, and every single child survived, because if she had been caught even once they would have killed her on the spot, and the children with her. And before I take you into this unbelievable true story that will keep you on the edge till the very last second, if you love powerful hidden stories of courage like this, welcome to The Secret Nun. Make sure you subscribe to The Secret Nun right now and hit that bell so you never miss another incredible true story that history tried to forget. And trust me, you will want to stay with me until the end, because what this nun did in that final winter will leave you in tears. And what I am about to tell you now started long before anyone knew her name, because her name was Sister Helena, and she was not famous, and she was not powerful, and she never wanted to be. She was just a quiet young woman in her late 20s who had joined a small Catholic convent near the border of Germany and Poland in 1936. Because she believed her life should be about serving others, and that convent was old and cold and made of grey stone with a small bakery attached to it that baked bread for the whole town every single day. And that bakery is the reason this whole miracle was even possible, because when the Nazis came to power, everything changed around her, and she watched with her own eyes how her Jewish neighbors, families she had known for years, families who bought bread from her every morning, were suddenly forced to wear yellow stars and were pulled from their homes and were told they had to leave everything behind. And she watched children who used to play in the street suddenly disappear, and she could not just pray and do nothing, because her faith told her that prayer without action was empty. And so she started to act, and at first it was small, because in 1938 she started hiding 2 Jewish children in the convent cellar when their parents knocked on the convent door in the middle of the night, crying and begging her to save them. And she hid them behind sacks of flour, and she fed them from the convent kitchen. And she told the other sisters that they were orphans from a nearby village, and the sisters believed her because they trusted her completely. And that lie saved those 2 children, and that success gave her courage, and that courage made her realize that she could do more. And then came November 1938, Kristallnacht, the night when synagogues burned across Germany and Jewish shops were destroyed and families were dragged into the streets. And that night a man came running to the convent bleeding from his head, and he carried a baby in his arms, and he begged Sister Helena to take his baby because soldiers were taking everyone, and he knew he would not survive. And she took that baby without hesitation, and she hid that baby in the laundry basket, and that baby lived because the soldiers came to search the convent 20 minutes later, and they looked everywhere but they did not look inside the laundry. And that moment changed Sister Helena forever, because she understood that the Nazis would kill children without mercy, and she could not wait for someone else to save them. And so she made a plan that was so simple it was genius, and that plan was the bread baskets, because every morning at 5 am, Sister Helena and 2 other sisters pushed 3 large wooden carts full of wicker bread baskets to deliver fresh bread to the town's shops and to the train station. And the guards at the checkpoints knew this cart, and they knew these nuns, and they saw them every single day, and they stopped searching them carefully after a few weeks because they looked so harmless and so ordinary. And Sister Helena realized that what is ordinary becomes invisible, and what is invisible can save lives. And so she started smuggling children in those baskets, and the way she did it was terrifyingly dangerous, because she would wake up at 3 in the morning, and she would go to the cellar where Jewish families were hiding in a secret space behind the bakery wall that the other sisters had helped her build. And she would pick 1 or 2 children, usually the smallest ones because they could fit in the baskets, and she would tell them with the softest voice to be completely silent and to not move and to not cry no matter what they heard. And she would wrap them in a clean white sheet so they looked like dough, and she would place them at the bottom of the large wicker basket, and she would cover them with a thick layer of freshly baked bread so the smell of the bread would hide any human smell, and the warmth of the bread would keep the children warm in the freezing winter. And then she would place a thin wooden board over them with more bread on top, so even if a soldier lifted the top layer he would see only bread. And she would say a silent prayer, and she would push that cart out of the convent gate right past the German guards, who often waved at her and said, "Good morning, sister," and she would smile back at them while her heart was beating so loud she thought they could hear it. And she would push that cart through the cobblestone streets with children hidden inches away from soldiers with guns. And she did this every single morning for months, and every morning she felt like she might faint from fear, but she never stopped because she knew what would happen if she stopped. And the first time she did it, she smuggled a little 5-year-old girl named Rachel who had not spoken for weeks because she had seen her parents taken away, and Helena placed Rachel in the basket and covered her with bread and pushed her through the town and across the bridge and to a small farmhouse just outside the town where a Polish Catholic family had agreed to hide Jewish children, and that family took Rachel in and hid her in their attic, and Rachel survived the entire war because of that one bread basket. And when Helena returned to the convent that afternoon and saw that the soldiers had not suspected anything, she cried in the chapel for an hour, not from relief but from the weight of knowing she had to do it again. And so she did, and the next day she took 2 brothers, both under 6, and she put one in each basket and she covered them and she pushed them past the same checkpoint, and the same guard who had waved at her yesterday lifted the bread to check, and his hand was just inches from the wooden board that hid the child, and Helena held her breath and the guard smiled and said, "Your bread smells wonderful, sister," and he let her pass, and she pushed the cart for another 10 minutes with her legs shaking so badly she thought she would collapse, but she kept pushing because stopping would mean suspicion, and she delivered those 2 brothers to the same farmhouse and then to another safe house further down the road that was run by the Polish resistance, and that network of safe houses was her second miracle because she was not working alone. She had quietly connected with a group of brave Polish farmers and nuns and priests who were all risking their lives, and they created a chain where one family would hide the children for a few days and then pass them to the next family and the next until the children reached the forests or the border where they could be truly safe, and Helena was the most dangerous link in that chain because she was the one moving them through the Nazi checkpoints, and she became so good at it that the soldiers started to call her the bread sister, and they would joke with her and they would even help her push the cart when the wheels got stuck in the snow. And every time they helped her they were unknowingly helping her save a child, and the irony would have been funny if it was not so deadly. And as the months passed the number grew, and it was not just 2 or 3 children anymore, it became 10, then 30, then 100, and the convent cellar was always full because Jewish families heard that there was a nun with bread baskets who could save their children, and they came in the darkest hours of the night and knocked with a secret knock, and Helena would open the door and she would take their children from their arms while the parents wept, and she would promise them she would save their babies even though she knew she could not promise she could save the parents. And that was the hardest part of her mission because she had to watch mothers hand over their children knowing they might never see them again, and she had to be strong for them, and she never turned a single family away. And winter of 1939 became the most dangerous time because the Nazis increased the searches after they heard rumors that children were disappearing from the ghetto before deportations, and they started searching every cart and every basket more carefully, and Helena had to be even more clever, and so she started baking a special large loaf on top that was very crusty and hard, so when the soldiers poked it with their bayonets it felt solid and they stopped digging deeper, and she started putting crying babies to sleep with a tiny drop of herbal tea that the convent doctor gave her so they would not make a sound at the checkpoint, and she hated doing that, but it was the only way to keep them silent when the cart rattled over the stones, and she prayed for forgiveness every time she did it, and it worked, and no child ever cried at the checkpoint, and the Nazis never found a single child in her baskets, and that is a miracle that is almost impossible to believe, but it is true, and it happened because this one woman was so careful and so brave and so devoted, and by the spring of 1941 she had already smuggled more than 150 children, and the convent had become a secret station on an underground railroad, and other nuns in the convent finally knew the full truth, and instead of being afraid they all joined her, and they all took turns pushing the carts and hiding the children, and one sister whose name was Sister Margarita was especially brave because she distracted the guards by talking to them for a long time while Helena pushed the baskets through, and another sister prepared the hiding space every night, and the Mother Superior herself covered for them when Nazi officers came to inspect the convent and said, "These are just baking supplies. These girls are just learning to be good Catholic bakers," and the officers believed her because she spoke with such calm authority, and the whole convent became a conspiracy of love against an empire of hate. And then in 1942 the deportations got worse and the ghetto was being emptied every week, and Helena knew she had to move faster, and she started making 2 trips a day. One in the early morning and one in the late afternoon when she pretended to bring bread to the poorhouse, and each trip carried 2 children, and that meant 4 children a day were being saved, and her hands were always burned from the ovens because she was baking so much bread to cover the children, and her feet were always bleeding from pushing the heavy cart in the snow, and she never complained once because every time she delivered a child to safety she saw the hope in that child's eyes. And that gave her strength, and there was one day in December 1942 that she never forgot, because she was carrying a little boy named David who was only 3 years old, and at the checkpoint a German officer who was new and very strict insisted on emptying every single basket, and Helena's heart stopped because she knew if he emptied the basket where David was hidden he would find him, and she did the only thing she could think of, and she pretended to trip, and she fell against the officer and knocked the basket out of his hands, and the bread spilled all over the muddy street, and she started crying and apologizing like a clumsy nun, and the officer was so disgusted by the muddy bread and by her clumsiness that he yelled at her to clean it up and to get out of his sight, and he did not search that basket, and she gathered the muddy bread with shaking hands, and she pushed the cart away, and David was still hidden safely under the board, and when she reached the safe house she collapsed and held David and wept for an hour, and David survived and grew up to become a teacher, and he told this story for the rest of his life, and Helena saved him that day with nothing but her quick thinking and her courage, and by 1943 she had smuggled more than 250 children, and the risk was becoming unbearable because the Gestapo had started to suspect that someone in the convent was helping Jews, and they placed an informant in the town who watched the convent, and Helena knew she was being watched, and so she changed her route, and she started pushing the cart through a small forest path that was longer but had no checkpoint, and she carried the children on her back through the snow when the cart could not go, and she got pneumonia that winter from being out in the freezing cold for hours every day, but she refused to stay in bed, and she kept going because the trains to the camps were leaving every day, and every day she waited was a child lost, and her sisters begged her to rest, but she said, "I will rest when the children are safe," and she kept pushing that cart, and in the summer of 1944, when the war was turning and the Nazis were becoming even more desperate and cruel, she smuggled her last group of children, a set of 3 sisters who had been hidden in the convent attic for 2 months and were too scared to leave the basket even when they reached safety, and Helena had to gently lift them out and hold them and tell them they were safe now, and those 3 sisters were numbers 298, 299, and 300, and after them she had to stop because the Gestapo raided the convent in August 1944. And searched every room and tore apart the bakery and found the secret space behind the wall, but Helena had already burned all the lists of names, so they found nothing that proved what she had done, and they interrogated her for 3 days, and they beat her, and they threatened to send her to a camp, but she never said a word, and she never gave up a single name of a child or a family who had helped her, and they eventually released her because they had no proof, and because the Mother Superior claimed she was mentally ill, and the convent kept her hidden until the war ended, and when the war finally ended in May 1945, Helena walked out of the convent and did not know what had happened to the 300 children she had saved, and for months she heard nothing, and she thought maybe many had not survived the rest of the war, and she prayed every day, and then slowly, letters started to arrive, one by one, from families and from grown children who had been hidden by farmers and who had survived in the forests and who were now safe, and they all said the same thing: "We survived because of the nun with the bread baskets," and one by one she learned that almost every single one of the 300 children had lived, and many were reunited with a parent or an aunt or an uncle who had also survived, and those who had lost everyone were adopted by the brave Polish families who had hidden them, and the miracle was complete, and Sister Helena never asked for any reward, and she never told her story publicly while she was alive because she said she only did what any human should have done, and she returned to her quiet life in the convent, and she baked bread every morning until she was too old to lift the flour, and she died peacefully in 1978, and she was buried in a simple grave with a simple wooden cross that said Sister Helena, Servant of God, and most people who visited that convent never knew that under that simple cross lay one of the greatest heroes of the entire war, and it was only years later when survivors and historians pieced together the chain of the bread baskets that the world finally learned what she had done, and today there is a small plaque on that convent bakery wall that says, "Here a brave woman saved 300 children with nothing but bread and love and courage," and that plaque is still there, and every morning the sisters still bake bread in that same bakery, and the smell still fills the town, and I want you to really feel this for a moment, because this was not an army and this was not a government plan. This was one young woman with wicker baskets and fresh bread who decided that she would not let children die while she had the power to push a cart, and she did it 300 times knowing that one mistake would have been her death, and she never made that mistake because love made her perfect, and that is why this story matters so much today, because it proves that even in the darkest time in human history, one ordinary person can become extraordinary if they choose courage over fear. And I want to ask you something very honestly right now: if you had been Sister Helena and you knew that pushing that cart with a child hidden inside could mean you would be shot if the soldier searched 1 inch deeper, Would you have still done it the first time, and would you have done it 300 times after that? Tell me in the comments below, because I read every single comment and I truly want to know what you feel in your heart when you hear this, and if this story moved you, if it gave you chills or brought tears to your eyes the way it did to me. When I first discovered it, please share this story right now with someone you love, share it with your family, share it with a friend who needs to be reminded that good people still exist and that one person can change the fate of hundreds, because sharing this story keeps Sister Helena's memory alive and it honors those 300 children who lived because one nun refused to look away. And if you want to hear more hidden stories of courage that history tried to erase, stories just as powerful as this one, make sure you are subscribed to The Secret Nun, and I will see you in the next story.